Right, morning everybody. Today you are going to be looking at media and crime. This should be the booklet to go with that PowerPoint. Now, it's up to you if you want to start off by using the PowerPoint to watch an example of the media and crime. There's a little example there which looks at an armed robbery in Russia. I'm not sure how it's pronounced anyway, but that's near you. So I thought that might be a nice one for you to start and watch if you so wished. And basically, as you're watching that, or as you're thinking about any way that you normally see crime and criminals portrayed in the media, have a look at these kind of 4 questions. So, how are the criminals portrayed in the media? Is it accurate as to who or what is the background of a typical criminal? What do they look like in terms of their group identity? You know, think about Cage for that one. And think about Cage for this one then. According to the media, who are the victims of crime? So who are you most likely to be the victim of criminality? What is the purpose and the aim of the media? And if the media do lie, if you find anything that you think about this maybe isn't as accurate as it could be, how might they lie? What might they be not so accurate about? So have a think about that. I'll pause it here and just get your thoughts together. You can watch that video if you wish. I think it's only about 7 or 8 minutes, just a crime watch reconstruction. And then let's have a think about these questions. Right, the first thing that you might say, or the first thought that you might have in your head, is, you know, how are the criminals portrayed in the media? Well, I think the Crime Watch story exemplifies all of the stuff that maybe the theory that we're going to be covering most today thinks. The first thing that they're going to say is that the criminals portrayed in the media most commonly fit the mould of usually a typical criminal. So usually working class, younger, male, ethnic minority, and we can see that the case in the clip that you just watched. Of course, they are the group who are most likely to be committing crime. According to the official statistics, so that's something to bear in mind. It may be a very accurate depiction of the crime rates, or if you don't think the official statistics are valid, maybe that's something that is a bit overzealous. According to the media, who are the victims of crime? Now, most of you might have said at the start of this course, you might have said, oh, women, old people. Well, we know that the victims of crime are generally the same group who are the most likely to be the offenders of crime. The young male ethnic minorities are most likely to be victims of violent crime, for example. But what you might see in things like Crime Watch is that in that show we've just seen, the victim was a woman. She was one of the victims of the bank heist that was going on. But that may not be accurate. It may not be women who are the most likely to be, to have a violent crime committed against them. Unless, of course, you're a feminist and you think that they would be. What is the purpose of the aim of the media? So perhaps it's to spread information, perhaps it's to do like crime watching, get some more arrests, or perhaps it's to sell newspapers. And the purpose of the media when we're dealing with crime is perhaps today, as we'll look at, the option could be that they're there to sell papers, and therefore they might distort the reality of what is going on with some potential lies, and I'm going to talk about those in just a minute. At the top of your page, so page number 1, you've got some keywords that you should be already secure and aware with. The first one is socially constructed. This will mean that the media distort the image of crime. They shape it, they create it. Socially constructed, it is made by society. So the media are able to construct what crime is. And what is the bad crime, what is the most popular crime, may not be accurate, but the media are able to do that. Then we've got news values, which might determine the way that they construct the media. So that is the level of kind of importance, the level of prominence that they want to give to the particular story of the day, because they feel that, right, well, that is going to get more sales. That's going to increase the amount of the spread of the newspaper. That's going to increase the amount of clickbait that we might get if we're posting it online. More people will look at this kind of story because it adheres to news values. And our final thing, and this was the last question on the in the quadrant, it said, what do the media lie about? And there are classic fallacies that people, or certainly interactionist theories, would suggest that the media focus on. The ingenuity fallacy. All crimes are clever and well thought out. You just saw on Crime Watch that it was like an inside job, bank heist, and it was a very cleverly orchestrated way. And they took a lot of care getting the van, and they took a lot of care covering their tracks. But actually, most crime is probably not that well thought out. It's maybe spur of the moment. It's impulsive. The class fallacy. The middle class are more likely to be victims. We saw it there that the main victim, apart from a corporation, was the lady who was assaulted in the bank. She, working at a bank, would therefore be a middle class woman. Middle class are not likely to be the criminals. And finally, the police fallacy. The police are efficient. The police do a wonderful job in catching all of these potential criminals. And you saw it there in Crime Watch, because perhaps Crime Watch's values are, making sure we try and get people caught, make it quite exciting, but also make the police look good as well, because we're working closely with the police. It was like ingenuity and brilliant police work that got these people caught. So, can you make sure that you've got your fallacies written down, your keywords written down? You don't have to write them out in full, obviously. Just take the salient and important points. Now, I've mentioned already today, and I said the word interactionists. And on page number 1, this hopefully should be where your focus has already gone, with those interactionists who care about labelling theory. Because when we are talking about the impact of the media, we are obviously going to be talking about interactionism. Now, it should need to remind you that there's my little man, and he is shaping society, because interactionism is a social action theory, and it is a micro. Now remember, that is going to mean that you can shape society, that the labels that are given out by individuals, that are given out by the media, can be taken in and accepted by you, and that will relate to the way that you interplay with the world. Now, for our labelling theorists, they've always been interested in the media. And I'm hoping you sat there and you're going, right, this is why this is going to be such a straightforward lesson, Dan, because we did media last year, and we did moral panics in youth culture last year, and we're always talking about media, and we know already lots of case studies that would be appropriate in a question about the media. Absolutely you would. And the key things for labelling theorists is that we associate two processes, and you've heard these words before. The first is sensitization. Now, sensitization is when you make people aware of things. So I always consider, when people forget what sensitized means, I always remember when people say, well, young people have been desensitized to violence because there's so much on TV, which means that you're not even bothered by the violence on television, you see it so regularly. Well, this is the opposite. Obviously, sensitization is when you become aware of something. And what you will see in lots of that media-driven moral panics is that the general public, the police and the judges become sensitized to the group who are the problem, and that's going to affect their relationship with that particular group, and the interplay between the public and that group and the police, and maybe that group and another group. And that will potentially lead to our next point, which is deviancy amplification. Now, you should be familiar with that, and deviancy amplification is where the deviance is magnified, where you make the deviance worse by press involvement, by the involvement of moral entrepreneurs who are going to make the situation worse. Now, we see most commonly that deviancy amplification takes place by and through the media, but we also know that deviancy amplification can be started by other moral entrepreneurs like the police, as in the case of the Brixton riots. That wasn't really media driven, that was police driven, and that started the deviancy amplification spiral. If we remember, that's Leslie Wilkins. But most commonly, deviancy amplification will be started by the media. They're the big moral entrepreneurs. They have the say. Okay, so can you make sure you've read through the first page, everything that that is on there we've just covered, and then you've got your definitions down for sensitization and deviancy amplification before you move on to the next one, please. Okay, on the next page we are looking at news values. Now, I'm hoping that from your first year that this idea of news values is nothing new. It's nothing new. It's Galtung and Rouge, and what they're going to say is Basically, the media are going to promote certain stories that have got certain news values. They're going to make them manufactured stories that meet and pushed into the headlines because they believe that that is more likely to get people to identify with it, more likely to get people excited, more likely to get people to purchase it. And our two big news values that Galtung and Rouge are going to say might lead to appearances in the front pages would be stories about violence, where we see death and tragedy, which always, as it says here, are rated above positive stories, and also ones where there's conflicts between personalities. You see this a lot with political ones, where you might have, you know, Johnson, well, it was a lot of Johnson versus Corbyn, wasn't it? But now Johnson versus Starmer, or even stuff like, if you remember, was it Colleen Rooney and Rebecca Vardy? You know, there was that clash of personalities, a showdown between two people, and the press and the media like that. Now, obviously, they're not going to be putting on the news page, on the front pages, you know, stories about kids helping grannies cross the road and things like that. And you know, that makes it very tricky to get a genuine idea of really what is going on. Is it simply that there are some bad things happening, but the media are covering those with more force and more impetus because they kind of meet the news values and the needs of that particular media organisation? Now, here is the massive benefit of doing this particular topic, is we already know what the theory is going to be that focuses on it, and I think we've already roughly can break down now into, hopefully, 3 big examples of the media's involvement in amplifying crime. 3 big examples of moral panics. And we know that moral panics will lead to deviance amplification. And I'm hoping that you sat there going, right, Stan Cohen, Mods and Rockers. You sat there going, Job Young and the Hippies. And hopefully you sat there going, Stuart Hall, Policing the Crisis. Three big moral panics, and we are going to be looking at these today. And thankfully, this is why this video is not going to be a long one, you've already done these almost to death. So we're not going to be focusing too much on them. We're going to do brief overviews of them because you should actually already know the content of these and what happens in these studies. And then the final thing that we're going to do is linking this to the exam and an exam question, and we're going to use these ones to do that. So, first thing I want you to do is read through page number 2 and number 3. So you can pause the video now, read through page number 2 and 3, which talks about Stan Cohen's The Mods and Rockers, and then we will be filling in page number 4 together. So pause it now, read through and remind yourself about the Mods and Rockers. Page 2 and 3, go. Okay, so Mods and our Rockers. Now remember, Stan Cohen's book is actually called Folk Devils and Moral Panics. He is kind of the writer who coins these quite now notorious phrases in sociology. So remember, the Mods and the Rockers, they are a young group, or 2 young groups of opposing subcultures. That they didn't really have a problem with each other, but they are going to have a problem with each other once the media get involved and exaggerate a first fight. There's that first confrontation. It happens in Clacton, and then this starts to see the press reacting. Now the reason they do this is because there's a slow news day. There's not much going on around the world, and consequently they're going to drum up, because it meets the news values. Remember. They're going to drum up this interaction between the two. Because of that, we're going to see a classic sensitisation now of the general public of the police and actually of the mods and rockers. So they become aware that they need to fight each other. The general public dislike them because now they're young upstarts who are going around just smashing the place up. And obviously the police are going to be looking out for these particular groups because they are troublemakers. They've been turned into the folk devils of the day and everybody knows about them. And then the end result is deviancy amplification. We see a bigger fight on the beaches of Brighton. We see more scuffles. And even though maybe the scuffles aren't quite as bad as they were in Clacton, there's more arrests and harsher sentences from it. And that is because of the sensitisation that we've already seen take place. Stan Cohen's Mods and Rockers, classic example, and probably the first one. Now, we move on to Jock Young and the Hippies. Now, Jock Young and the Hippies, there is an overview here on page 5. So again, because we've already covered this, all I want you to do is read through the top 3 paragraphs of Jock Young and the Hippies, and we'll come back and we'll discuss the same flow diagram that we've just done for Stan Cohen's Mods and Rockers with them in just a second. So read through the top page 5, please. Right, okay, Jock Young's Hippies, one that we are familiar with, drug users in North London, these are the hippies. Now what's going to happen is the media are going to start what we would class as a moral crusade. You're going to hear this word again, it's going to come up again in the booklet later on. They're going to start a moral crusade against drugs. They're going to say drugs are bad, drugs are a scourge of the earth, we don't want drugs and we don't want drug users. Fundamentally, drug users are bad. Now, we start to see the sensitisation of the media towards, of the police, sorry, the criminal justice system towards this group. So they're now going to be stricter policing of these dirty, lazy druggies that were the hippies. Okay, because remember, dirty, lazy druggie was what the hippies were labelled as. So we go from being a hippie and starting to get a reaction to us smoking marijuana here at stage 2, to a position where people who look like the hippies are going to be targeted more by the police. So that's going to mean some of the hippies, and this is probably a weakness here, and we'll talk about that in a second, but some of the hippies are going to go because we see the group get kind of close-knit and smaller and become more extreme, and that's when at the final stage we see the switch to heavier drugs, such as heroin in this particular group. And the argument that Young makes is because that deviancy is being amplified, we see them going from weed to heroin, which is quite a big step up. Now, obviously a weakness of moral panics and this involvement in the press and this labelling by the media is that some of the hippies do drop out. Some of the hippies decide at this stage, when they start to see the police get involved, right, I'm not going to be a hippie anymore. And it doesn't explain why some decide to carry on and end up using heroin, but not all of them will get to this level. So there are weaknesses with this theory, as there are with every theory, so it's important to note that one. Before we move on, we would have been doing ethnicity either the previous week or next week, but that's when we'd have covered Stuart Hall's Police in the Crisis. Now, remember that Stuart Hall is neo-Marxist, so I'm going to go over this one with you first. So if you need to take some notes on this, find a page or find an area to stick something down. Stuart Hall is a neo-Marxist, and remember, neo-Marxism means that you're fusing together traditional Marxism with interactionism to create a fully social theory of deviance. It's why it doesn't start with an act. All of these start with initial fight, first bit of drug use. Whereas Stuart Hall's going to say the problem is capitalism, okay? Capitalism is failing in the UK. We're having lots of low wages and unemployment and urban decay and all of those things that are going on in society, but capitalism is failing. So fundamentally, we've got a cause here for the problem before we get to the act, where the act is mugging. And the fact that the press are going to start to highlight mugging as a crime specifically perpetrated by young black males. Now, Stuart Hall says that this is kind of like a rebranding of street robbery. We always had street robbery in England, but because America was using the term mugging, we kind of stole that and we appropriated it to the black community, and therefore, as soon as the police, the general public gets sensitised, we start seeing an increased level of racism towards the black community, including things such as stop and search by the police, which led to greater arrests. So he would suggest that actually what's happened here is the media are trying to distract us. This act of mugging is a distraction from the problems with capitalism. And there you see that Stuart Hall is slightly different from the others, because he doesn't start here where traditional interactionists would. He's got some stages before, like these ones, which is where we see the element of traditional Marxism in there as well, blaming the structure first and then understanding how following one act we get to labels and an increased number of arrests and an increased, level of turmoil between some groups. Okay. That should take you, hopefully, to page number 6. And on page number 6, you very simply got a rundown of some of the weaknesses and the evaluation of moral panics according to McRobbie and Thornton. There's a couple of very easy ones to remember. I always think frequency is a good one. There are so many moral panics about nowadays that young people and the general public don't get bothered by them. And there's obviously a lot of other ones here, and there's a final one is that people don't even start moral panics anymore because they're wary of them backfiring. We've got a really good case here of David Cameron, and a nice video clip if you want to watch it, of him getting caught riding his bike dangerously to work whilst the Conservatives were trying to be the environmentally friendly party, and remembering that then he was caught as well being followed to work by a driver in his car with all of his stuff. So the purpose of him riding the bike were completely lost. There was no environmental gain from him doing that. Rebound. You don't want to start a moral panic in case it jumps back and bites you. You see a lot of American politicians starting moral panics about things like family values, and then it comes out in the press that they've been having an affair or something. So there's a lot of wariness now about even starting these. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different potential weaknesses of moral panic, some evaluation there that you could put in. And then on the bottom of page number 6, and we are almost done, is the media, relative deprivation, crime and consumerism. And all I would like you to do here is remember Mr. Daniel Briggs. So Daniel Briggs, if you remember, is the guy who studies the London riots, and his work is very supportive of left realism, because his work suggests that relative deprivation leads to crime. And what happened during the London riots were groups of young people going around breaking and stealing stuff because they wanted the free stuff that they saw available to them in the media. So in a way, the media is responsible for things such as the London riots, because by promoting consumerism and by showing adverts for this, adverts for that, adverts for the other, this is what you must have, this is what image you must be, this is what technology and trainers and clothes you must have to be cool, right? It's meaning that actually it's promoting relative deprivation and forcing people out there to try and take things that they can't afford just because they want it. They want that free stuff that's available to them. So read through the bottom of page number 6, looking at the media, relative deprivation and crime, consumerism, and make some notes please about Daniel Briggs and his study into the London riots. Okay, all I want you to do on page 7 is read through what we've got here, okay? We've got a little section that's talking about moral crusades, and we've mentioned that because we can see an example of it in the Hippies. A moral crusade, a stand up and fight back against horrible deviance that's going on against our drug takers in the Hippies. So please have a read through of that. We've got some examples here of moral crusades, you know, jihadist killers in our streets, 100 more Muslims choose jihad than army, Muslims tell British go to hell, Muslim only public news, and then halal secrets of Pizza Express, right? That might be a moral crusade that we're taking in the press, and quite a harsh one by some of the right-wing papers against Islam. And you can certainly see that, you know, Islamophobia as a moral panic being used there to turn Muslims into folk devils works quite well with our deviance amplification. And there is one at the top, Maddie McCann. And here is an example of something that we would refer to as missing white woman syndrome. Something else that the media have an impact of, where they focus mainly on white young girls who've gone missing. So if you're a white girl who goes missing, you get put at the front of the paper. If you are a black girl, if you are an Asian girl who goes missing, you're not going to get the same news coverage, and the news coverage is going to be different, as it says there. Okay, so what you've got to do now, because that was relatively straightforward, is your first thing that you've got to do is send me a copy of this. We are going to do a practice paragraph, but this one is from a topic question. So the topic is assess the view that the media have a significant impact on crime rates. It's 40 marks, okay? And what I would like you to do is focus that question on Jock Young and the hippies and put together a paragraph that would, well, I'm hoping you're thinking is going to support the view that the media have got a significant impact on crime rates. So, here are your sentence starters and the way to structure it. I've said, evidence that the media has a significant impact on crime rate comes from the study of, you're going to use Jock Young, where it shows that the media start a moral crusade against blah, 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 blah. This can often lead to a moral panic, usually against blah, 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 which is the most common group. In the case of Jock Young and the hippies, what happens? And what does this show us? Okay? So you've written 1,000 paragraphs like this before. You're applying your knowledge with telling me what this shows. You're applying your knowledge by telling me who moral panics are usually against. You're giving details of, in the case of Jock Young and the hippies, you're telling me what goes on there. You're telling me what a moral crusade is. And then, support for this, you might consider going back and looking at Miller and Riley on the top of page 7. Once you've added that, they could offer some support to this idea that the media, through moral crusades, can have a big impact on the crime rate. And you might start to link in some weaknesses here. It might be that your next paragraph is on McRobbie and Thornton. So you don't necessarily need to go, right, I'm going to now write out a big chunk about the weaknesses of moral panics by McRobbie and Thornton. You could just start to work that in so that that's going to be your next paragraph, okay? So what I would like you to do is have a go at that 40-mark paragraph. Send me a picture of it when it's done. And after that, you've got one final thing to do. And your final thing to do, once you've read through the rest of the booklet, because that's already in there, you already know that, is this. Okay. So we should hopefully already have done this at the start of the lesson, if my thinking is correct. And you're going to finish with a very, very quick activity. On the board is a 20-mark question. And that 20-mark question is, where's my pen? This, I don't know if you can see it. Explain why some sociologists argue the media amplifies deviance. Okay, now we hopefully already looked at this at the start of the lesson, but you know that for a 20 marker, we're looking for at least 3, hopefully 4 paragraphs, each paragraph with a different explanation of the question. So explain why some sociologists argue the media amplifies deviance. Now, the question is asking for why. If there is a why, we need a because. And I'd like your because, if you're focusing your paragraph on it, could be in your very first sentence. Now today we've looked at, actually we'll probably do Young. Later we'll Cohen, Young, Hall and Briggs are the 4 writers that we've looked at today. Now I'm hopeful, and all I want from you, because I'm going to ask you to finish the plan for homework, I'm not going to ask you to submit the full plan to me. All I want you to do is tell me what your reasons are. Because they can't all say the same thing. Sure, they're all moral panics. Sure, in all of them you can talk about how the deviance is amplified. Sure, you might be using the term folk devils a fair amount. But there's a different explanation that you have to give from each of these writers. So, what I want you to do, I'll do one and you've got to do the other 3. For Jock Young, because the media start moral crusades against groups or things it deems unethical. So, what is the because for Cohen? What is the because for Hall? What is the because for Briggs? We've already mentioned these a couple of times today. Okay, so go back, look at this again, or if it's straightforward to you, happy days, brilliant. All right. So all I want you to do is, because hopefully we've done an activity together at the start, I want you to do the paragraph from the 40 marker and give that a whirl. Send that one to me, and then all I want is your because reasons. Your starting sentence from these as to why you're going to give a different explanation, or how you're going to give a different explanation for each of those as to why the media is going to be amplifying deviance. Because fundamentally, Stuart Hall is going to say it's a different reason to Cohen, and Cohen's going to say it's a slightly different reason to Young, and Daniel Briggs is going to say it's a different reason to all of them. So that's what I'd like you to do. If you've got any problems, as always, let me know. If not, I will speak to you next week.